Ladies and gentlemen, hello, hello. How are you all doing this fine and dandy evening? So, today we are going to be having a discussion about value. Now, what is value? Is value only a value if it's something personally valued? We're going to be discussing different types of value, like instrumental value, preferential value, fiscal value, values that are values in and of themselves, like final values, that sort of thing. And we're going to be bringing up both intrinsic and extrinsic values and properties and things like that. So tonight's discussion is going to be a little bit more informal. I know I had planned to put something down, but man, time has just got away with me. It really, really, really has. I've had a hectic week, a couple of weeks actually. So tonight is going to be a bit of a more informal overview that Dave and I are basically going to be doing from memory. And if anyone's got any questions, obviously chime in with them, and we'll be doing a more refined version at some point in the future. So that's what we're doing with this. I do apologise that we're not fully ready, but when are we ever? Anyway, tonight I'm going to have a mix. Now, I did put out a message earlier asking if anyone had any requests or suggestions, because I'm looking for new tracks and I haven't had time to delve in. There have been a few that have come in, but there weren't quite enough to do a whole set. So what I'm going to do is tonight I'm just going to load in some old tracks. I think I might play some house or something like that. I still haven't fully decided what I'm even going to mix. Sorry. Yes, so I'm still in the mix, and I haven't fully decided what I'm going to do tonight. But what I will do is, if people would like in the future to submit enough tracks, I will do a whole night of your requests. So if you find on the YouTube community, on Answers and Reasons YouTube community tab, get your suggestions in there, or contact us on Twitter or anything like that, and I'll do a whole stream of, or at least pre-stream of all of your requests that you've got in. And if it's different genres, I'll try and blend them somehow, and work my way up through the tempo till we get really mental. It'd be a good laugh. Now, obviously, if you're catching this on the rerun, there's a good chance I'll have cut this out, so make sure you check out Plato's Rave. And if not, well, here we go. We're going to be having the mix right now. Hey T King, nice to have you here right at the beginning. Always good to have people here nice and early. So we've got about half an hour where I'm going to be just having a bit of fun with the turntables. As I mentioned, I've done drum and bass the last couple of times, so I'm gonna start off with some house. Haven't mixed house in ages. I'm usually quite terrible at it, so it might not be fun for you, but it's definitely going to be fun for me. But if you're not in the mood for listening to music, we'll catch you in half an hour when Dave will be here and we'll be discussing value. Anyway, enough of me, time to get on with the mix. Hello and welcome to the Sci-Fi Show. I'm Joe.
And I'm Dave.
And thank you, all of you who've been keeping me company at the pre-stream mix. It's been entertaining. A complete stack at the beginning where one of the what do you call it? Green screens had music in the background that I didn't realize because it was set to mute on my end, but it was playing out. And typically, I hadn't set my turntables to actually output sounds to Streamlabs. But what's a sci-fi show without a fuck up at the beginning and somewhere else in the middle as well? So, as I mentioned in the intro, tonight's show is about value. It's part of axiology. So we're asking the question tonight: what is value? We're going to be discussing certain things like the different types of value. We're going to be looking at concepts like preferential value, instrumental value, final value, things that can be of value in and of themselves. Intrinsic and extrinsic values and properties and things like that. And as I mentioned, I've been wanting to put this into a more formal stream for a while, but time has been getting away from me and I haven't had the chance to do it. So I figured we'd have a bit more of an informal chat about it. It's something that Dave and I have both written articles on before and read a little bit about. I mean, Dave's read a lot about it. I've read a little bit about it. And hopefully we can explain some things and come up against some of the common misconceptions about value and discuss how different people actually view value as well. So, the first question: what is value, Dave?
Nothing is of value. Nihilism rules. No. Value, when you say the word, lots of different things come to mind, don't they? Really, like you've got the $299 for an Xbox console or what have you. So that's monetary value.
Or fiscal value.
Or fiscal value, yeah. But generally, when we say value, we're talking about what makes something good, the goodness of something. So the value of something is the goodness of it. So if I say, what's the value of the pet rock that your daughter gave you? Of course, there's no monetary value on that. But there is a kind of value that you bestow upon it, isn't there? Like a personal value.
Yeah, plus you get to say you've got an atheist in your pocket.
Yeah. those things all sort of count as the goods of the object, and that's what's giving it value.
Yeah.
Or perhaps the ends that it can achieve by attaining that object, so a sort of instrumental value. But we'll talk about all those others when we actually talk about all the different kinds of value.
Most definitely. I mean, I think one of the things that I personally see in value is something that is of benefit. That's the way I do it. I mean, that's part of the goodness of it. It's got some benefit to it, whether it's benefiting you because it makes you happy, or it makes you well, it enables you to do something else, it makes someone else happy. I'm using a lot of the same examples there, but that's the sort of thing. Like, I'd see benefit as a way to describe value that gets away a little bit from some of the issues that people might have with goodness. They might say, well, that's if you're saying it's good, it's a purely subjective judgment on it. But I think we could say that, for example, there is value in planning your route ahead. Say if you're traveling from A to B, say you're traveling to Scotland, and you know what time you're going to be traveling, and you can use a few different route planners and make sure you get the best route for that time of day. There is a certain value to doing that, and those services they offer you this benefit. And I would agree, it's almost saying the same thing. That's the qualities of goodness that you're talking about there, Dave, aren't they?
Things that benefit us, yeah. It's basically it. If it offers us benefits, then there are some goods that can come from, and thus give it value.
Yeah. So whether you want to take goodness or benefit, I mean, they're much of the muchness, really. Same, but different. But they, in conversations that I've had with people, when you talk about the goodness of things, that does tend to become a little bit more troublesome in the conversation. I've had the same problems using the word benefit, but less so. So I think we should start with this, though. The first type of value I think that we should discuss is probably the simplest, which is preferential value.
Yeah, so sort of personal value. And to some extent, some people might use the term subjective value. It's coming from their subjective opinion about it, so that's what's giving it its value. This is a pretty simple one and a pretty obvious one. It's the value of something to us.
Yes.
That doesn't mean that it's the only value that something has, but it's one of the values that this object has.
Consider something like a choice between a burger or a hot dog. You're going to prefer one over the other. You know, that's got more preferential value to it. If that's the sort of thing that you'll try and get, one of those two. If you have to do certain things to get one or the other, you're gonna tend to go for whatever you prefer. Other preferential values would be things like your music tastes and your sense of humor, and it's really tied purely to you. It is the most subjective a value can get. It is your preferences, your desires, you know, that is the be all and end all of it. And that's why that one's quite simple, and I think that's why it's a good place to start. Now, there are some arguments that people will have where they say everything comes back to that. Maybe. I mean, maybe it does.
Well, yeah, a radical subjectivist would because that's their thing.
Yeah.
But if you were to say that all kind of value is subjective in that sense, then there is one sense you could argue for the intrinsic nature of them, which is Kagan's way, but we'll come to that in a bit. There is also another sense of subjective value, which people kind of often overlook, but it's what we ought to value. That's also part of the theory of value. Are there things we ought to value? Does personal value also include what we ought to value?
So from that regard, is there, you might realize that even if you don't actually value it, let's just say you're a bastard. Let's just say you're me. You should value your family, but you don't. Is that sort of what you're saying, that there are certain values that you realize as a person that maybe you should value more than you do, and you act in accordance with what you ought to value because you realize there is that ought there?
Sort of, yeah. I mean, it's kind of like the ought of normative ethics. But if you can imagine, when we speak of oughts, we speak of the ideal rational observer. So what we're saying is, if you ought to value this, then the ideal rational observer would, the person with all the facts would want this.
Yeah. So we are. It comes back to the sort of the same with normative ethics. Oh, what are you doing in here, Cat? Get off my turntables. I'm going to turn them off before you start playing something. Like with normative ethics, it's sort of what someone ought to do in a certain situation. Things you ought to value are the things, again, that the ideal observer would say. So something that all rational persons, given the same mind, the same information, the same understanding, would conclude is something that is of value.
This is the choice we should go for, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes sense. So,
Well, one way to look at this is through the idea of objectivist ethics,
okay.
which is also sort of objectivist value. So you have this list of things that are just objectively valuable, whether somebody wants to value them or not. Say, taking care of health is objectively valuable. If you don't want to, if you don't want to look after it, you should still kind of want to. There's still an ought to do it. For lots of different reasons. I could understand why people don't, but shelter is another kind of objectively good thing. Even if you don't kind of want these things, there's still things that we ought to want. And it's sort of the same with value to some degree.
Yeah, I suppose a lot of the things that you mentioned there are things that potentially have an instrumental value to them as well. So you ought to prefer them because of their instrumental value. That might not be the case for everything you said, but I felt that it was a good segue into instrumental value. So just to reiterate, preferential value, it's the things that you prefer, the things that you personally prefer. Now, instrumental value, would you like to tell us what that is, Dave?
Yeah, instrumental value is another pretty easy one. It's when something has value to us so that we can, in effect, get to another goal that gets us closer to and closer to a final value, the final goal that we want to achieve within these things. So something can be instrumentally valuable only for a certain length of time, only for a ticket is instrumentally valuable. But there's nothing within it that makes it valuable in and of itself. It's the narrative we tell and that we share about this ticket to let us get into the cinema.
Yep, that makes sense. So something that's really easy to give you an idea of preferential value, instrumental value, is money. Money is something that has that ability to get us other things that which we prefer to money. Now, some people prefer having money, right? Some people prefer having money and save it up for all their days, and other people prefer other things over money. For example, my turntables, I preferred to have those than money. So I used money instrumentally to get the turntables. And all of you regret it every single time I do a stream and have a mix.
Now, the question is, were your turntables final value or instrumental value?
Yes. Because I think that is, excuse me, sorry, I think that is something that comes into to both of it. I think something can have both. So maybe let's cover off what we mean by final value and see the link between the two, because I think there's certain things that can have this sort of loop. So what do you mean by final value, Dave?
Okay, so final value is the value that we're ultimately attempting to achieve with this thing, or that we're going to get out of this object. So the hedonist would argue that the only real value is pleasure or happiness. So the final value would be something that was valuable in and of itself. You can't use it to get you anywhere else. It's good for the sake of being good. So sort of like happiness. And so that's what the final value is. The things that the instrumental value get you to. Some say that the final value has to be an intrinsic value for reasons we'll get to when we kind of discuss intrinsic value is the one that's most in dispute.
Mm.
And where
Especially
most of
with
the
the ways
discussion
you
takes
split the
place.
hairs over intrinsic
Yeah,
value and intrinsic properties. And
yeah. So final value is basically just what your instrumental value is aiming to get you to. And this value is something that you're trying to achieve in and of itself rather than as a means to get to something else.
yeah, so something that like that, something like being happy, as you mentioned, for the hedonist. But even if you're not a hedonist, being happy could be a final value, you know. So the turntables allow me to have a mix. There's the instrumental side of them there, and that results in me being happy, even if it's terrible. Um, and then I get that final value from that thing because I'm happy. Because the benefit for me being happy is because I'm happy. It gives me pleasure to do this thing. I enjoy doing it, and I know that's a bit circular, but that's what the final value sort of is. Now, final value can also be used instrumentally in the sense that if you have a happy workforce, for example, they're more productive. So giving them something that is potentially a final value, such as happiness, encourages them to work better and off their own backs and put extra time in and all sorts. And then it all loops back round to everyone being happier because the company does better, the stakeholders or the shareholders are much happier in themselves, and everyone is happy. So it's sort of like a final value used as a stepping stone to make a bigger final value. But would we call that in between stage, which is a final value, just a final value because it's having this instrumental part to it?
I mean, I suppose one way you could see it is whether that final value still achieve the intended result. And you could say perhaps that what comes after all the instrumental value that comes after that is a new narrative about the thing. So it's not the thing you're trying to get which brings you this happiness. It's the using of the thing that you get. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. We should probably check the chat out. I'm sorry, I haven't been keeping up to it. But yes, so where are we? Honestly, atheist also wants waffles. And asks what is value. Value is what I am going to have not much of by the time this weekend is over. Um, yeah, and Lone Wolf is living honestly atheist dreams. So Senku says, "Would will you invite Majesty of Reason YouTube channel in your channel?" I don't really know Majesty of Reason, but I'm happy to have a chat with anyone as long as they're not a dick. Basically, I mean,
Oh no, he's
to be
one of the
honest.
nicest guys ever.
Oh well, in that case, then definitely.
But oh yeah, but I think he'd be a bit bored with us too. We're like way below his pay grade.
I tell you what, Senku, if you can get him over here, then I'm up for a chat. I like to have a chat about anything. So yeah, what's goodness though? That's the question that's come up. So that's why I was trying to say earlier with, something of benefit, something of benefit. So if you are thirsty, then there is a benefit to having water. And that's the property of goodness that you get there. And do you know what? That's given the instrumental value of the water to your thirst. There is that benefit there. I don't think there is anything that you could say from a value that can't be described in terms of benefit, but that benefit is what is good about it. There is a paper that by Chris, I can't remember his name, on well-being on the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, that I actually put in the description, that sort of goes through talking about value as goodness. That will give a much better definition than I have right there. So yeah, you then ask what's benefits. I mean, hopefully that was enough of a description for what is beneficial. Hopefully that explained it to you. Ideal rational actors still make choices and believe in accordance with goals or ends, do they not? We will get to that. In fact, that's what Dave said just after it. We will get to that. That is part of the discussion. We need to lay the groundwork first. Water and food and shelter are only good insofar as biological health is good. I mean, the flip side to that is if you have water, food, and shelter, your biological health ought to be good in general. And even if it's not, like, even if your health isn't good, it will keep it better if you have those things than if you don't. So there is still the benefit to having them, even if your health isn't particularly great. But that's something that we can discuss a bit more in there. Kimo says, I much prefer experiences over money. Money buys me experiences, and I don't mind spending it to get there. My ex-wife disagreed. This is something that you do sometimes find. There are people who prefer an experience, and others that prefer, say, things, or others that prefer the money itself. And you can have that incompatibility with the people that you're around. And sometimes you'll find people will use someone. So I'm like you, Kimo, in the sense that I preferred experiences or things that could give me experiences. So I used to take my mates out to the pub. Because I left school and everyone was else still at it, I used to work and I'd take everyone out to the pub because I'd rather have people with me and have the good experience. But I had one friend who's no longer a friend, who I didn't know was secretly working and just using me for free drinks. Because why would he spend his money when he knew I was going to take people out to the pub? And the thing is, I didn't mind taking people out to the pub. It was the fact that someone did something so untoward, so hidden, so sneaky. That was the problem I had with that situation. Do you know what? If he had turned around and said, oh, I do have some money, but I don't want to spend it, my answer would have probably been, well, come out, I'll buy you a drink, I don't mind. You know, and that would have been fine. But it was the underhandedness of, yeah, no, I've got no money, then finding out, oh yeah. Godless Scummer, how you doing? So anyway, excellent. Saturday Evening Post, yes. Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. I know you know that, Kimo, anyway. I've spent about 95% of my money on women, booze, and dope, and I've wasted the other 5%.
Sounds correct.
I'll drink to that. Right, so just to cover it off what we've done so far. So preferential value, it's the things you prefer. Instrumental value, it's the things that can get you other things, usually things that you prefer. And final value, things that are of a value in and of themselves. They don't necessarily get anything else. They might improve other things, but they are a final value, like being happy, right? That is something that in and of itself is good. It can make all of the rest of your life's interactions better and more positive. And that in turn can make you more happy because you're having better interactions. But the feeling of being happy is a value in and of itself. Do you want to go out for some drinks again? I'm a bit skint at the moment. I'm incredibly skint, especially seeing as this weekend I have to go to my brother's what's it called? Bachelor party. And he's decided to do it in bloody Bristol. And it's an expensive weekend. It's cost me 250 quid before I've even got there. And it's just like, what? I've got no money, and my credit cards are like all maxed out. It's like I've yeah, it's going to be a tough weekend. But do I want to go out for some drinks again? Most definitely. Alternatively, if you want, I'm happy to get some tinnies from the Lidl, and we can sit in my garden, or in the studio and do a stream. In fact, Jeff, we'll get you on the turntable, shall we? I do have a fair bit of metal, actually, but it's just not as fun to mix because, well, it's not designed for that sort of thing. Though occasionally you can find a track that works that way. Anyway, back on track. So, preferential, instrumental, and final. So next we should discuss the difference between extrinsic and intrinsic, don't you think, Dave?
Yeah, sounds good. So extrinsic value is the value it gets from without. So any value that is imposed onto it from an external source is an extrinsic value. Sort of your pet rock has extrinsic value because you value it because of some memory, some story that you tell yourself about it.
Your 2-year-old came up to you and she painted it pink and said,
But yeah,
"Oh,
said, "I
Daddy."
made this for you."
Yeah.
Yeah, and you said, "I'll keep it with me forever." Therefore, so any value that is imposed onto something is an extrinsic value. Intrinsic value. Now, there's a lot of debate about what intrinsic value is. Hang on one sec. Sorry, I'm very coffee tonight.
Oh, no. Not the COVID
yeah.
again, is it, Dave?
No, I don't think so. That's way too soon. Yeah, so there's a lot of ideas about what intrinsic value is, and this goes back a long time. It used to be sort of this idea that intrinsic value is the goodness that could be no more good within an item. But most of those have been pushed aside now. The main dominating view for a long time, and still a pretty dominating view now, is that intrinsic value is the value that something has if it was in isolation. So if the only thing that existed was this item, it's the value that it would hold.
Yeah. And I almost think that this is one of the things why I think that all value is ultimately extrinsic myself. Because I think that if there is nothing to actually benefit from something, then how can there actually be any value to it? Now, the argument is something along the lines of, a beautiful painting. If that was just on a desolate planet somewhere, that would make that planet better. But I'd argue, well, how? Why? What does it do?
Yeah. So there's an example that is often used where happiness or being happy or goodness or love these are all things that have intrinsic value. They're good in and of itself. So we're asked to imagine, let's go with, say, happiness. We're asked to imagine a planet or a universe completely alike, completely empty, but one has happiness in it. And that's all it has. It has happiness and empty universe against the empty universe. Now, which one has more value? The one with happiness in it or the one without happiness in it?
Yeah, I kind of.
And there's something intuitive to be said there. Like you can say, well, of course, a universe with happiness in it is it will be better. But now think about what happiness is. It's not just some feature of the universe that exists before the happiness exists. It's a feature that comes about because the happiness exists.
Yeah. Which ties me back to my point that you sort of need life to have this thing. Like,
Yeah.
happiness
Well,
isn't this thing that's over there, it's this thing that's here because of life.
that's it. I mean, to go on with that example now, you're asked an empty universe where just the property happiness exists in it, or an empty universe, or a universe capable of creating happiness, even though it's not a property that existed at the beginning, but it can create happiness. So it creates these creatures and it makes them happy. Which one is more valuable? The universe without happiness is a defining property, but an emergent property, or the universe that's completely empty that has no actual happiness in it, but does have the property of happy? Which one of those two is more valuable?
The one where the happiness can be experienced, surely.
Yeah, and the fact that it actually comes about, that it actually obtains, because what's the point in in a universe that can be happy but has nothing in it that can be happy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So in the first example, it's a case of there is the property of happiness or there is no property of happiness, but there's nothing in it. I can understand why someone would say that there is really no difference between the two because the happiness can't actually be experienced. Though there would be some that would say, well, the one with the property of happiness could have something that could experience it one day, whereas the one that doesn't have the property of happiness or the potential of happiness ever, would be worse in that regard. But when we take it to the second example, we're saying this one has the property of happiness, but no one will experience it. And this one has it as an emergent property, but it has to, the universe has to evolve. But then there's these creatures that will experience happiness. And all of a sudden, they're experiencing that final value.
Yeah, something like that. So it seems functionally no different to say that there's this universe with nothing in it, but it has the property of happiness in it and this empty universe. There's nothing functionally different. Neither will produce happiness. They actually have the same amount of happiness. So they're the same universe pretty much, except one has happy attached to it. But why does it have happy attached to it? Isn't that a value we attach either to ourselves or to something we see? So just to say it has happiness in it, well, we're going to say, well, where is the happiness? Show me where the happiness is. Without that happiness, sticking that trait on it doesn't actually mean anything.
No, unless you could say that there is a specific molecule in the universe that is happiness. Which you could argue things like, serotonin and dopamine, things like that. But I'm talking about a specific happiness molecule.
The phenomenological
Yes.
aspect of it, yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, it does seem to me that whilst you can have these final values, things that are valuable in and of themselves, value is ultimately extrinsic. I can understand why these arguments that come about it being intrinsic do come about, and how you're describing it there. But as you mentioned, there's no functional difference between these universes that because no one's actually experiencing it, which says to me that value actually is ultimately extrinsic.
Yeah, there needs to be some kind of value or there to make it a value. Um, you can stick a universe in it with happy as a property and say, well, if people come about, then it's something that they should value. But you can say that about the universe where it's emergent as well.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that even though all value is ultimately extrinsic, that all value is completely subjective, does it?
No. I mean, even in the sense of happiness, you could still say that even though um, to get its value, it needs to be valued extrinsically, but it has these properties that would be good even if nobody valued them, like happiness. If everybody in a planet valued being sad, happiness is still something that they ought to value because it makes the world better. It adds benefits to the world. Um,
That comes back to the question of, does the sad make them happy? You know, in the same way that
are
some
they
people can
still
find pain
chasing?
pleasurable. Like,
Yeah, yeah. So are they still chasing that final value of happiness?
even if they don't
Um,
necessarily directly value that final value.
yeah. So you can say that even if it has this extrinsic element, the reason it's being valued is specifically for these intrinsic properties that are worth valuing, even if you don't value them.
Yeah.
Um, and that's basically the Morian view. It's an isolationist view. Something only has intrinsic value if it has that value when it is the only thing that's in existence. So we could say that it's non-relational. If it has that and it's non-relational, then it's an intrinsic property.
So, I mean, the difference between intrinsic property and intrinsic value. I mean, intrinsic value, as we've just discussed, is pretty much impossible as far as we'd be considered, as far as we'd consider it anyway. But an intrinsic property doesn't necessarily have to be personally valued.
No, but it is the thing that gives it the intrinsic value is this property, or that's what some argue that, this property is what makes it intrinsically valuable.
So
Even if you
some
don't
would
value
equate
it, it's still,
intrinsic properties with intrinsic value. Would you
yeah.
say yourself, though, that if something has valuable intrinsic properties, it makes it intrinsically valuable?
Well, yeah, because if they are properties that exist that are valuable, then it automatically makes them valuable.
Even if there were no people around, would that still be the case? Or are you saying within the paradigm that we exist of having life, these properties
I'd
are
say
intrinsic?
like good exists, good or happiness or some health. These things have intrinsic value, and because they're good for their own right, it doesn't matter whether it's sort of like does 1 + 1 = 2, even if nobody exists in the universe.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. So
Yeah.
some examples of intrinsic property that we've both had um, uh, through various conversations that we've had and the articles that we've written and the stuff that we've read would be the things like education, wouldn't they, Dave?
Yeah, that is something that's valuable in and of itself because it has benefits to people's lives. It makes them live better lives, hopefully, if the education is good. Um,
That's a big if.
yeah, that's it. But it has value. If you think of somewhere like Afghanistan, where young women aren't allowed to go into universities or schools, it has no value going to university or school there. But ultimately, we would say, it would have more value to her if this was implemented.
Yeah. And I mean, most kids don't actually value going to school. I know I didn't when I was there, but there are certain things that you learn and they do improve your lives. And another example that we could give is perhaps medical treatment versus faith healing. Now, faith healing has been proven to be no better than placebo. So, in the sense that there are some minor things that faith healing can benefit in the same way that sugar pills can benefit. They're things that would get better on their own, but people just needed to get into a positive mindset. Cool. But with things that actually need medical attention, faith healing is useless. Now, someone might personally value faith healing over science, over medicine, but the medicine would have a value over and above that because, objectively speaking, right, if they needed their an operation on their leg to set it and put in not a splint, what they called the metal plates. Oh, my mind's gone blank, Dave. You all know what I'm talking about. When sometimes you have a break and you actually need to get some metal screwed into your bones to hold them in place, and so it sets properly and all of that. That would be objectively better than someone just sitting there and praying over it, because you might end up with the injury going septic, them having to cut off the leg, the person potentially dying. There is a big difference between the two, um, and I think this is where we can say it now. A detractor of this way of thinking would say something along the lines of, but that's you subjectively saying it would be better. How would you answer that, Dave?
One more thing before moving on to that. Another aspect of Morian intrinsic properties is the idea of necessity. So, for something to have intrinsic value, these values have to exist in every instantiation of that object. Just thought I'd throw that in there just to complete. So, when it comes to this, this is sort of a response to people who say all value is subjective. So something only has value if a person values it, and that value it gives, that subject gives it, is the value that it has. Now, if we think about the example you were talking about, faith healing, and the one I used in my dissertation was a rock. A tribe sits around this rock, and they pray to it, and they pray for little Timmy's leg to miraculously heal and not be unbroken anymore. Or let's say smallpox. They pray to it and it to cure somebody's smallpox. Now to them it has this value and they bestow this value upon it. But does it really have any actual value when it comes to
Healing.
kind of healing? Yeah. Will it cure the smallpox?
Oh.
Well, no. That's it. It just won't. So basically, you have a chain of values that fails to achieve its ultimate value. So obviously, there's something wrong with the value system going on. Be problems with knowledge, problems of understanding, and that kind of thing. But if you think about a vaccine for smallpox, that has value for actually stopping smallpox. So
even if
really, if
someone doesn't value it.
yeah, that's it. It'll still, even if they say that won't cure smallpox, and it cures smallpox, then it cures smallpox. And if they really do want to cure smallpox, this tribe, they ought to prefer, if this is their goal, they ought to prefer the vaccine to the rock. So it's sort of conditional upon achieving a goal and the instrumental value that it has in it to make it reach that final goal.
Yeah, no, it makes sense to me. I find at this point in conversations with people, it often still loops around to where you're still seeing that person's survival as a benefit. Yes, because it is. It's a benefit to survival. Things are a benefit to things. It's sort of almost saying, well, someone might not value life continuum. Okay. But as a species, we are genetically programmed for survival.
The thing is, as well as this would make no difference to this argument, whether they valued not saving somebody's life, well, sure, they've let somebody die and they've achieved the value that they set about, but it would make no difference to the actual value judgment of whether X doesn't help with Y is better than A helps with B or helps with Y, The value judgment doesn't change no matter what anybody thinks of it because you plug these categories in and they achieve the final result.
Exactly. It doesn't matter if you don't value the final result because the final result is still of that benefit. And don't value things being beneficial, it doesn't stop them being beneficial.
Exactly.
And you can split hairs over this point for ages. And I would agree that you still need life forms present to understand the benefit. Right? Not even understand, but to observe it, I guess, or benefit from it for this benefit to happen. But if there is this life form there that benefits from something, there is that value, even if they don't actually value it themselves.
Exactly.
Which comes back to why I said, I think it's ultimately extrinsic, but there are, as you were talking about with the intrinsic side of things, there's these properties there that regardless of whether they're valued or not, still have that value there.
Well, an interesting thing about intrinsic properties is Shelley Kagan came up with another argument, and that the Morian view of intrinsic properties and intrinsic value is a little too restrictive. He understands it, but think of a situation like this. Somebody finds the pen that was used by person A to sign the historical document B, so say the Declaration of Independence signed by somebody who signed it. Now, intrinsically speaking, that pen has no more value than any other pen of its kind. Instrumentally, either. Oops, sorry.
No, sorry. No, I'm listening to you. I was just laughing at the chat. I've just seen something that Jeff said. Sorry, carry on. Don't let me stop.
That's all right. Yeah. So, yeah, the two pens only have the same instrumental value. But when you think about the pen that was actually used to sign this historical document, that has more value than all the other pens. But that doesn't come from one of the physical properties of it.
Yeah.
That's an actual property. It's a story projected onto it by extrinsic, forces, like people believing that it has this value or this state of affairs giving it this value. But those properties don't exist in isolation. But you would still say that there was this property intrinsic to this object that gave it value. it's tied to the past. So there is a sense of intrinsic that isn't covered by the Morian view, and that's properties that exist within it. Even if we put them into it, that pen having that property is what gives it its value, as to the people that value it.
Yeah.
And probably historical value too, when you think about it.
Yeah, most definitely. I'd agree with that. So going back a little bit to earlier, Jeff says, if there's only happiness and no sadness, can we appreciate being happy? And that's one of the things that people often talk about with the ups and downs of life, isn't it? Is the fact that if you didn't have the downs, you wouldn't appreciate the ups. There are people who have had their life that's been so good, the second the most minor thing goes wrong, it's the worst thing ever, because it is actually the worst thing that's ever happened to them in life. You know, their shoe ripped or something like that, and you're just like, you might look at this going, I've had so much shit happen to me, but this is the worst thing ever that's happened to this person. They've never experienced something so bad. But if someone was just always happy, could they appreciate it? I don't know. I don't think you could. I think almost you'd get bored or used to the feeling. I'd like to think, though, that you could just always be happy and appreciate it. But I'm speaking it from a perspective where that's not the case. So yeah, is it possible to be happy without being able to appreciate being happy? Yeah, it's hard to say because we can only speak from our reality in regard to this. I suppose you could be happy and not realize that you're happy until something bad happens, and then you realize, oh fuck, this feels different. I suppose it's one of those things that we'll never really know the answer to, though. Don't you think, Dave?
Is being able to appreciate your happy a necessity or a necessary condition to being happy? Like, does one entail the other? If not, then it doesn't matter whether you can appreciate being happy. You are happy.
Still not sure. Jeff says, though, and this is the one that made me giggle, I've had one revelation. Speaking to online atheists about philosophy is probably not going to achieve happiness.
I'll just go then.
Kimo suggests that he's not a big fan, but Tom Nagel's The Possibility of Altruism springs to mind when I think about value. The prudential worth or value of a thought, or especially action, nags at me. I've not read that myself. Have you, Dave?
No, I haven't. Sorry.
Kimo, I think we need a Kimo's like reading list, because every stream, Kimo, you bring up these things, and every single time you do, I think I'm gonna read that one. I'm gonna read that one. Kimo, do you know how many of them I've remembered to read? Yeah, that many. Oh shush, that's back in the room. So even though value might ultimately be extrinsic, you'd say that there are these intrinsic properties that have value to them, regardless of whether they're valued or not.
Yeah. Well, no, not whether they're valued or not. There has to be at least one person that values this intrinsic property that only gets its existence from the narrative told about it in order for it to be that intrinsic value. but they're valuing it because of properties that it holds based on connections rather than the actual properties of the pen. So it doesn't exist within the pen, even though it does exist within the pen once it's created.
Yeah, that's fair. So even intrinsic properties need some form of extrinsicity.
At least one like those, yeah.
Yeah. Would you say that with all intrinsic properties? I mean, if no one valued medicine, for example, but it still had that benefit, would it still have that value?
It has a value, but a different kind of value than one that's it has a possible value rather or a potential value rather than an actual. Like the more you break it down into the kinds of value, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Not it has a value, whether somebody values it or not. Yeah. But it has a specific type of value which makes it that kind of value.
So a lot of it you'd probably say does come down to, as you said earlier, is the sort of ideal observer take on it. Can you get? She's being really annoying tonight. It's hot in here, so I've got my door open, and she's obviously out. She's decided to come and try and knock all of my stuff over, dribbling all over me as well. So, okay, actually, there's a message that's come in that might be worth chatting about. Actually, medicine for one person can be poison to another. That's true, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the medicine has no value. So let's say, right, this particular bit of medicine, in every million patients, it kills one person and it cures the rest of them. Does that medicine have no value? You know, it saves a million minus one. I'm not going to say the whole number. And kills one. Okay, to the one person that it's killed, yes, it's awful that it's happened to. But does that mean that it has no value? Like, objectively speaking, it saves most people, and 1 in a million it kills. There is an objective value there. It's a quantifiable value that we can say it has. You just have to hope that you're not that 1 in a million.
So another idea about intrinsic value, like you'll get some arguments that say that something only has intrinsic value if it can exist in isolation and is kind of has an eternal feel to it and a necessity feel to it. Think of a person who values protecting Venice. He wants to stop, further deterioration, things like that. It's not something he can achieve in his lifetime, and won't actually have its full value until Venice is, protected. That value, he isn't doing it for something in his life. He's just doing it for the sake of doing it. So there's something intrinsic within fixing Venice that makes it a value even after he's died.
That's fair. That's a different take on it than I've thought about before.
Yeah.
Oh, I understand that one. Interesting.
And that's one of the problems with intrinsic value, is that you can say intrinsic value is X, and look at it and say, is that the best way to describe it? Well, it sort of removes the normal way we speak of intrinsic value. When we speak of intrinsic value, we don't speak of it in isolation. We speak of it in terms of things that it holds within it, just as regular conversation. But you have to come up with a suitable definition for either's that will make both sides happy, I guess, or one side only happy and say, look, that's why this side is wrong. The actual problem with intrinsic value is the actual defining of it. Perhaps it
Yeah.
doesn't even exist.
Yeah, no, that makes yeah. I suppose a lot of arguments do come down to these battles, though, don't they, Dave? You know, if you're going to define your term as X, then you can accept it's that. In the same sense that we could say, if with a lot of the arguments that we'd have about certain things, like, yeah, under your parameters, under your definitions for these words, I'd say yes. You know, I define God as a beer can and cider, actually, so that's a bad example. I define God as a cider can. Here's a cider can, therefore God exists. You know, if that's what you're doing it, yeah, okay, cool. For what you're saying God is, I will accept that that God exists. I just don't know why you'd call it a God. And you could say the same thing with different takes on things like value and ethics and morality and all of that sort of thing. Sometimes it can be hard to have that stable and good working definition. When it comes to intrinsic, I think there are certain things that I would say would give us a better working definition than others. And I like the idea of talking about intrinsic properties that have value, because it takes away a bit of talking about this thing having just intrinsic value, because I think all value is ultimately extrinsic, but there are these properties that are intrinsic property in these things that have occurred because of, life. I think, folks, can you get some questions in, and we'll come back, because the cider god has said that I need another one, and yeah, we'll be back in like 2 to 3 minutes. Thank you for waiting, folks. I do apologise. What we're saying here is I need a fridge out here. That's a really bad idea, because I would end up drinking throughout my workday. Although, patron, all of that.
Very smooth segue.
So, Timo mentions this seems a good time to consider whether some values are incomparable or incommensurate. So, give me a little bit more detail about what you mean there, Kimo. Like incomparable, I would say, yeah, or is that supposed to say incompatible, and it's just a typo? Because I'd agree that you couldn't necessarily compare certain types of value, especially when it comes down to personal preferences. I mean, that's just you can't, you could compare apples with oranges there. But I think I need a little bit more about what you're talking about there, Kimo. I mean, do you have anything you can take from that, Dave?
No, it sounds to me like he's saying which values are sort of, like he says, just incomparable. So you can't compare certain values to certain other values, sort of apples and oranges. Is your life valuable? That seems like a bit of a weird question. For a philosophy class, it's normal. But I don't think that there is a value comparable. Like, there is no valuable comparable to a life, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So there are values that perhaps don't fit into the system that need to be talked about in their own special way.
I mean, I'd argue that life is the ultimate value because without life, there is no real value.
Makes sense.
I don't know if that's how it would be argued for within philosophy. I mean, as you know, Dave, I'm an idiot layperson who tries to get his head around this stuff. And you know, sometimes there's people that agree with me, so they must be wrong. Okay, so Honestly Atheist is speaking about the example before. For that 1 in 1 million person, did the medicine still have value to them because they thought it would be valuable, or was it always non-valuable to them due to the unknown fact that it would kill them? That's a good question, actually. I'd say that it giving them hope of the cure is a certain value. I wouldn't say the medicine had no value to them. And outside of the individual, you know, it's every person other than that 1 in 1 million people have that value.
I mean, it stopped them getting ill from COVID. So it still fulfilled its purpose.
But not the final value of not dying from it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he didn't die of COVID. So there's that fun of
He
value.
died of the medicine instead.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, saved them a long, painful death. There are probably types of value, but I'd say that yes, it's a really good point to make. The fact that things can have a value just by perception of value. So there was never no value, and as you mentioned, Dave, it could have value in the sense that reason it killed them is because if they were to get COVID, as an example, let's just say we were using the COVID vaccine, they'd have had a long and painful death. But actually, you know, they were given the vaccine from not one of the mRNA ones, so not Pfizer or Moderna. They were given the AstraZeneca, and it caused some reaction that caused them to die, which was if they had got COVID, they'd have. Which, do you know what? I think pretty much everybody's had it, even the people that don't realise they've had it. But if they were the one of the people that would have had, you know, suffered, so it saved them a lot of suffering. So there was even a value there that they wouldn't have valued themselves, but we could add it to it.
Well, you can say this is why I like value pluralism. Nothing wrong with saying that something can have. Yeah, I'm sorry. Something can have multiple values. If you think back to the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the instrumental value of the pen is what made the person pick it up and sign the Declaration, which then gave it its own intrinsic properties of being used at the signing of the Declaration of Independence and created new value within it. So its intrinsic properties are its instrumental properties for different reasons. So something can have multiple properties. It's just as simple as that. Multiple values.
Hopefully that's answered your question. Kimo's got a very good point that I completely agree with. God is not a cider can. God is a full overproof whiskey bottle. Yes, definitely. There's no argument there. It was just the closest thing to hand.
That is the final value to end all final values.
John says this whole conversation surrounding what gives something value reminds me of my thoughts on cryptocurrency and money in general. If cryptocurrency is being backed by dollars, how is that not going to crash when the dollar crashes? Yes, definitely. Cryptocurrency is one of those ones that really confuses me about how it ever took off. And I mean, it fluctuates so massively that I can't keep track on it. And I remember when it first came out, and I think I say it first came out, when I was first aware of it, Bitcoin was pennies. And I wish I'd bought a couple because, you know, maybe not right now, but a couple of months ago, I would have been sat on a lot of money. I mean, I'd still be sat on a massive profit now, but not the same amount that was a couple of months ago. But we're talking about, I mean, this is one of the things that's funny with money in general. Any sort of something that has this fiscal value, because it's so made up. Cryptocurrency highlights how weird money is in general. Now, money does have a benefit to us, right? So I know it has this instrumental value that we talked about earlier, about how it can help us buy things, right? There's that instrumental value. And there's the preferential value of, well, no, I prefer to have lots of money. But there is another type of value that money actually has, which it allows us to trade without carrying stock with us. There was a time when you used to have to go to markets with bags of grain and all sorts and barter and trade and all of that. If you just have money, it's like, oh, well, yeah, here's a couple of notes. So there is almost these intrinsic properties to money that mean that we don't have to carry our stock with us because we've got these promissory notes that are valued everywhere within the economic system. Which is still so weird, man, because why do these things actually have value? Like, and then you get something like a credit card, which is actually like, well, yeah, you don't even have to have the money with you. You don't have to have the cash with you. If you lose the credit card, you cancel it, you get a new one. But, you know, credit card, beep, there you go. You've got your stock. And that has that value over and above money is the fact that you lose your credit card. It's generally insured. It's someone else's money that you're spending and you just pay off regularly. Economics, man. Like, the whole economic system. So weird. So fake. Such fiction. All it is fiction. Yet we're so tied into it. I'm to be honest, if we keep going along this path, I'm going to go into like Fight Club rants, and we should probably avoid that. Because, you know, the things you own end up owning you. Oh, great question. How is moral value distinct from other types of value? Go on, Dave. I've talked for ages.
It's the kind of value. It's sort of like, well, if a board game and a video game is a game, what's the difference between the two? Well, it's there in the distinction that this value is this particular kind of value. So a moral value is the goodness that it brings about in the sense of a moral form. Simple as that.
That was really succinct. I was hoping you were going to stump him, and make him go, oh, just a little bit. But you see,
Yeah,
this
it
guy,
did.
he's
I
too
just
bright.
made it all up off the top of my head.
So John says, I don't get it. I've heard them say the value lies in its utility. I'm just unsure. So, yeah, I mean, that is a part of it. Because when we're talking about value, we're talking about the properties of goodness. Goodness can be described in the benefits that it has. So something can benefit something else, even if it's not actually thought of as something that is valuable. When you say life is the ultimate value, I start thinking in mathematical terms for some reason. Interesting. I'm glad I inspired someone to speak in mathematical terms, because why not? Math is amazing. Kimo says, per Kant, do thinking agents have a price or a dignity? That's a very arch expression of incommensurate values, though. So Kant thinks that we shouldn't use people as a means, because people aren't ends in and of themselves. Can people be bought? Yes. Should people be bought? It's a very different question. No, but then what do you think a workforce is? We're going to get into the realms of political philosophy if we go down these lines of thinking, though, aren't we? And for that, we definitely need Martine with us. Kimo also says, one of the central questions in value theory is whether there's more than one intrinsic value or not, as I understand it. Sort of the monism and pluralism hullabaloo.
That's sort of what I'm talking about here with the different ideas between Kagan and Moore, is that there's different ideas about what intrinsic value is, the kind of properties it should hold if something has intrinsic properties, and whether that there just is more than one type of intrinsic value.
Yeah. No, that's fair. Listening to philosophize this recently, going into monism a little bit recently. But I've had too many ciders to remember any more details right now. It was very interesting, though. I must say, right, if you're into your philosophy and you like pretty concise episodes, 30 to 40 minutes long, that absolutely fantastic and go through all sorts of history, philosophy, and everything. Philosophize this is absolutely amazing. I would promote the hell out of Stephen West, who looks way younger than I imagine him based on his voice. Like I imagine him to be a much older guy. I think his Twitter account and the pictures he posts must be from 20 years ago, right? I don't know how any guy his age has as much knowledge as he does. Honestly, Atheist says, when you say life is the foundation of value, I imagine a hypothetical hell world full of suffering and no pleasure, and I question the soundness of your premise. My point about life is that without life, ultimately, there is nothing to assign value to anything. There is nothing that is going to benefit from. Even if I don't personally value specific things, they can still benefit me. So they have a value, I just don't personally value them. But without life, there is there is nothing to benefit from anything else, really. There's none of this perception of value. So that's why I say life is the ultimate value, because value comes from life, which is why all life is ultimately so all value is ultimately extrinsic, but there are intrinsic properties within things that have value. That's the separation I make. I don't know if many philosophers would agree with my split there. Probably overly simplistic for them, but that's how I got my head around these concepts originally. I mean, what's your take on it, Dave?
On what? Sorry.
So I would say that life is the ultimate value, in the sense that without life there is no real value, because there aren't things that benefit from it. I don't think just having certain things in a universe is better than others. You know, if we were to put a beautiful painting in an empty universe, I don't really think it would be any better than an empty universe without that painting.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Maybe saying life is the ultimate value isn't the best expression. Maybe there's a better one for it to put the idea across. But yeah, without life, I would say that it's the same as 1 + 1 = 2. Is that true without anybody being around to actually express the statement? Well, yes, but no.
Yeah, there's no yeah.
You know, these statements are still true, but if there's nobody around to make these statements, you know, and there's nobody around to value them, then is that value in existence?
Maybe I need to think of a way to reword what I'm saying, because obviously I know what I'm saying, but yeah, I'm sorry for poor communication skills. Um, yeah, cryptocurrency isn't really backed by the dollar. It's a blockchain of transactions. Transactions are the commodity. There is no currency behind the blockchain, only the transactions. Yeah, and this is why I really don't understand how it works. I understand that. I don't understand how a currency is based on that. It just things were simpler when it was like, yeah, your money is relational to how much gold there is in a bank. At least there was something precious backing up the fake bits of paper that were the promissory notes. Then people just started printing shitloads of cash because fuck it, there's no gold. We don't have gold, we sold it all to them. But as long as people keep imagining there's gold, you know, that's all that really matters, the belief in the gold. And now we've got something that is the belief in the belief of the belief of the gold. That's basically what blockchain is. There's still no gold. But yes, Lone Wolf also says transactions give blockchain its value, and you are correct there, definitely. So without the transactions, without someone using the blockchain, there's no real value behind the blockchain. You could say the same thing about money as well. If suddenly everybody decided that they're going to reject money and they're not going to deal with it, it loses its value. It loses its instrumental value. I suppose it doesn't necessarily lose its preferential value. Someone could still prefer to have money even though it had no other benefit. You know, they just liked money, they liked the look of it, they liked the smell of it, or something like that. It loses its intrinsic properties, which is trading without the need to take your goods with you. So yeah. Economics is the practice of assigning value based or Baswed. You're typing like me tonight, Dave. On the ability to trade the items, demand creates worth. Yes, it does. I mean, the whole supply and demand thing is how the economy works, and it's that value that comes from it, and the bulk of it is instrumental and preferential, all trying to achieve a final value, and more often than not, it doesn't. Just think it will and then don't, and they keep buying more and more, and that's why you have some people who are shopaholics. Kimo says a hell world full of pain and suffering being worse than death is kind of the idea behind the right to die assisted suicide notion. Yes, it definitely is, but I mean that right. I know you were talking about honestly atheist point before. That's a stream in and of itself, and that's what I'm not going to touch tonight. Sorry. John says the modern day workforce, I would say, is slavery. Now that's an interesting point because I would say in certain areas he's definitely right. One of the classifications for slavery that I've heard over the years, and obviously it's not the same as old school slavery, like modern slavery, is working below minimum wage. And people who work more hours than they are signed up for, even if they get a good wage, the number of hours they work drops them below their hourly rate, below the minimum wage, could be seen as slaves in that regard. But it's not the same as classic slavery. It's very different. I'd say it's immoral. I'd say it's something that needs to be looked at. But I would say modern day slavery for us Westerners is not the same as slavery we understood as, and we're almost watering down the term and diminishing the impact actual slavery has. I mean, what do you think, Dave? Am I being too soft?
No, I agree. See, one of the problems is using slavery in that context is that much of what people hear when they hear the word slave is attached to all that classic slavery. But there's still the element that you're being held against your will. I mean, if you think about a woman who's been trafficked, she doesn't get any of her earnings. She's made to do something she doesn't want to do. Her life is completely in somebody else's hands. Even if she didn't suffer from physical violence, although you could say, the sex is physical violence in and of itself, you would still say that there's a sense of slavery going on there, even if it isn't as bad as classic slavery.
But that is very different to the person that's forced to work a a minimum or low wage job and do extra hours for free.
Yeah, it is. But there's still some sense of slavery that goes
There
on
is,
with each. Yeah, yeah.
but it sort of waters down the term. I agree, there is that some sense. But you need that appreciation that it's some sense rather than totality.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, Dave says slaves of yesterday might have something to say about that. Yeah. So he also says, without life, there's nothing that we know of that can assign value to things that we know of. Yeah, but if something's not alive, how can anything assign value to anything? Depending on your definition of life, I suppose there could be automated life, artificial life. But isn't artificial life just another form of life? We've had a couple of streams about that too. I do want to get back into the AI conversations though, Dave, actually. Especially speaking to both Henry and Dr. Theosip. Very, very, very interesting. Knew a hell of a lot about a topic that I didn't realize how much I didn't know. I mean, I knew I didn't know much about it, but it was some of the things that they were coming out with. Both of them. I mean, these are two streams complete about a year apart, I think. But shows how much that even when you're aware that you don't know something, there's even more that you don't know. It can be really difficult to digest how much you really don't know about a particular topic, can't it?
It's also pretty much impossible to start actually having the knowledge of it, or where to start gaining knowledge of it. You can get yourself there. It's like the paradox of inquiry. You can get yourself there, but without knowing what you're looking for, how do you know what you're looking for?
True. That's the problem I have on Google all the time. If you don't know the search terms, how can you get the desired result? So, carrying on. Sorry, just skimming through the chat. So, honestly, Atheist says, sure, life is necessary for value, but I'm not sure it itself is intrinsically valuable. Maybe. Depends on your definition of intrinsic, doesn't it? I would say there are the fact that life gives rise to value makes it valuable in and of itself. Because without life there is no value. And one of the things you mentioned earlier, Dave, was that necessary property, wasn't it, Dave?
Yeah, the property of necessity. It has to think of it in terms of a necessary being. If it's going to be intrinsic, it has to instantiate these properties every time it has to bring these properties about every time this thing is instantiated.
So life is necessary for value, which means life is valuable to value intrinsically. From that particular definition, say, or
yeah, it's definitely not in the sense of the Morian thing, but you could say that there are properties within life that make it valuable, intrinsic to the actual concept of life that make it valuable. under a Kagan sense.
So again, it comes down to semantics. I believe one whole plus one whole equals one bigger whole. It doesn't equal two. I mean, John, I don't even know where that's going. um, Lone Wolf says, well, Joe, look at it like this. Commodities are all about scarcity and demand. So on a world full of only salt water, the highest value commodity is fresh drinkable water. Yes, yeah, no. I get that. I think I've had almost that exact conversation with Martin at some point in the past as well.
That would be a kind of value theory about what makes something valuable. Does commodity and scarcity, uniqueness, do any of those have an impact on what something, the value that something has? Sort of like monetary value figures out, the monetary value theory is about figuring out how monetary values work, how scarcity impacts it, all that kind of thing. And that's actually one of the questions just with value in general. If we think about the pen example,
yes,
with the Declaration of Independence, so if we say can something gain value? So you have this old pen and it's got instrumental value for writing, but does this event that it had in it give it actual extra value? Now, if you think about an example you brought up earlier was art. If you think about the Mona Lisa, people will say, yes, that has intrinsic properties. That intrinsic property is beauty. Doesn't matter whether there's anybody there. It's beautiful. It goes in there, and it has value. But does someone viewing it and finding it beautiful give it more value? Is value something that can be gained? I mean, is the Mona Lisa worth just as much locked in a vault that nobody can see? As, if it's in an art gallery, does it have more value?
Well, no. I mean, from my perspective, I think it has to be somewhat valued. There has to be someone that gets benefit from it, even if they don't
Yeah, but that's
personally
just to get
value
the
it. Like,
value itself.
yeah.
But does it have more value? Like, education is valuable, but does it have more valuable if it's actually in effect and being used?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's one of the questions. There's people who will say something only has values based on the properties it has or the narrative that we tell about it. But if two people are watching the Mona Lisa and enjoying it, it's bringing about more goodness.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. So therefore, we would imagine that it's more value because if value is the amount of goodness that something has, two people enjoying it has more goodness than one. So therefore, it's more valuable for two people.
Yeah. Which is more valuable than no people and it being locked away. There might be the value that it has in itself, but without it having that value to other people. I mean, that's still talking about, I don't know, I suppose an instrumental value to bring them happiness thing. You could say the same about medicine as well, couldn't you? In fact, even more so with medicine, because people don't necessarily have to even value medicine to receive the benefit of medicine. They're still getting the instrumental value of it making them better, even if they don't respect medicine themselves. Having medicine and no one needing it sort of like, well, yeah, there's the properties there where it can make someone better, but it doesn't need to.
It has potential value, but no active value
Actual,
at
yeah.
that moment. Yeah.
So that adds almost another dimension to value, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's why it's not as simple as like many atheists and skeptics will go, oh, value is just subjective. Well, this shows you kind of how difficult the relation between the valuer and the valued is when you think about it.
Which I think, I mean, tying things back into question that came earlier about the moral value, there can be some answers to Hume's is all that you could say the same from. Yes, you might need someone there to actually say, well, this benefits X, but and all rational persons should value X. So therefore, in this situation, X is the appropriate action, and it's almost a way to address it, surely.
Yeah, if you're going to overcome the is-ought distinction, you've got to figure out a way of getting from the actual state of the matter to why you ought to do something. So, like you say, you can actually find a middle step, like it's raining out. If it's raining out and I want to stay dry, I ought to take an umbrella. I want to stay dry, therefore I'll take the umbrella. But you can't just go, it's raining outside, therefore therefore take your umbrella. There's no actual logical joiner there.
Yes, but you could argue that in a situation that all rational persons, ideal observers,
Yeah,
of things,
but that's what I'm saying. There's an
to...
implicit premise in the middle there. Yeah. Or, explicit if you've made it explicit.
So, Kimo says employees have the option to quit the job, slave do not. Yes, that is one key difference. Although you could argue that there are some employees that can't afford to. They're trapped by life. Right now, right, I've got a pretty good job and I work for a really good company, right? But I could not just quit my job. I would have to find another job first that paid me at least as much as this one. Because I'm still struggling financially. I have a good job and I'm struggling financially. There have been times in my past where I've had not as good jobs, but I've been in situations of my life where I've been definitely a lot more affluent than I am now. Swings and roundabouts. But yeah, I have the option to quit my job, and that would throw my entire life and family in ruin. So, do I really have that option? And there are people in a lot worse situation than me. I'm just using myself as an example because I don't want to call out on other people. Right? There are people who have a lot worse situations than me. So you say they have the option to quit the job. It's not necessarily a feasible option. John says, Old World slavery, New Age slavery, it's still slavery at the end of the day. And that's the last you're going to say on the subject. That's fair. I'd just say it's a different form. It's kind of like comparing cheese with vegan cheese. Yeah, it's still cheese, but it's not really cheese, is it? And that's the last I'm going to say on the subject. The reason Bitcoin has higher value than Ethereum is simply because of the acceptance and usage around the world. The blockchain is huge, and with every new transaction, new are available. Yeah, but then Bitcoin's far more volatile than the rest of it as well, isn't it? But yeah, I don't understand enough about it really getting so shush. I won't diminish real slavery, which exists in human trafficking today, with that watered down idea. My job isn't like the person living today in slavery. Yeah, no, I'd agree with you there. There is still a real world human trafficking slavery happening today. Yeah, that's what Dave brought up earlier, and there is. And I'd argue that that is somewhat better than what slavery used to be, but it's still not good in any way, shape, or form. And I don't think the employment world is particularly great, especially for those in the minimum wage jobs, you know, or if you're in the UK, you're some form of NHS worker as well, right? Or teachers. Fucking hell, teachers get shat on. But it's still not the same as classic slavery or human trafficking. And maybe it's something from from what you guys are saying. We need to actually think about the different kinds of slavery. Maybe it's one for the future. I'd suggest next Tuesday, because we don't actually have anything booked in for next Tuesday. That's not enough time for me to prep, seeing as I am away for the weekend. And by away, I mean I'm going to be drunk the entire weekend. So yeah, unless any of you out there know enough about slavery so that you can come on and deal with it whilst I'm on my second day of hangover on Tuesday, going, that'd be good. Harvey, hello. I've not seen you before. How deep does the rabbit hole go? Yes, that's the only answer I can have to that. How deep does it go? I mean,
deep enough for me to get my penis in
it. Not that deep then.
Nope.
But yeah, I with these sorts of topics, I mean, anything that we've discussed tonight, whether it's value or morality or slavery, all of them are incredibly nuanced and deep topics that can't really be addressed in one stream, especially when we're trying to keep them relatively short. We're failing horribly tonight. Um, it does go incredibly deep, and there are so many different things. John, you're very right. The more you know that you don't know. That's correct. It honestly that it's one of those phenomenons that seems to happen. The more you learn about a particular topic, the more you realize you didn't know before, and that makes you doubt what you don't know in the future as well, because all of this stuff opens up in front of you and you go, oh, I realize I don't know that. And then you go, hang on, I didn't know that before. So how much stuff do I actually not know that's out there? Because I now know I don't know all of this. And oh my God. And yeah. Oh, look, John actually agrees with me there. John, you should know by now, if you agree with me, you're probably wrong. Agree with Dave. Oh, in fact, he's this way, isn't he, on the screen? Agree with Dave. um, um, what you're saying speaks to me. I have a literal drawer full of cross-name brand pens. Pens. Oh, okay, I'm not going to address that one actually. That's just Dave being silly. Kimmo, Thomas More's Utopia proposed a similar quandary. If you owned and loved a Van Gogh painting or Van Gogh painting for 20 years and discover it's a fake, do you suddenly hate the actual picture? See, this is one that we've actually discussed before, isn't it, Dave? And it's a very, very, very interesting one because there are certain things about the painting, it being an actual Van Gogh, that make it that's one of the intrinsic properties, I guess you could say, about it, is the fact that it's a Van Gogh. But the fact that it's such a good copy of it that it still brought you the same pleasure until you realized it wasn't. I mean, like the painting, surely you like the painting regardless of whether it's real or fake.
And that's part of the value came from it not being fake. So it does lose some value because
Definitely loses some value,
but
I
not
wouldn't say
the
it
aesthetic
loses.
value.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's that. So there's different types of value, and that's what we were saying earlier. There are different types of value things have, and simply, yeah, there is a value in it being a Van Gogh, but there's also the value of what it looks like. If you're one of those art whores that basically buys things for the label, the same things like a fashion whore, I only wear these brands, then yeah, the fake versions of it means that they lose their value. But if you like the way it looks, it hasn't lost that value. It's just lost the authenticity that it would have had. Kimo says the teaching profession is so different in so many varying parts of the world. Not all cultures have the same ends or goals for educating children. You're completely right there. I think a lot of the Western world tries to fit people into little boxes and to fit them into certain jobs. And I know that's not necessarily the way it goes in other parts of the world. I think teachers get a bad rep, and I think because of it, we end up with shit teachers now. So many teachers could be better if they were treated better, but they're not treated well in this country, and therefore you end up with bad teachers. Education in and of itself, and by education I'm referring to a good and balanced education, does have benefit for the people who are getting it. It can improve a hell of a lot of things. Honestly Atheist says, is the actual history of the painting that spoils the appreciation of the fact that you were lied to? So this is going back to one of the earlier points that I made about being lied to soured my opinion of a person. Now, that is going to be part of it. Right? The fact that if I was sold a fake Van Gogh that I knew was a fake, and I just appreciated it for its aesthetic value, then that would be a very different situation from being sold a real Van Gogh and from finding out later that it was a fake and it wasn't real. So yeah, there is that part there. For me, for my personal appreciation of art, I don't care who made it. I am very aesthetic when it comes to art. So certain things like something being a real or a fake Van Gogh don't matter to me. And for me to own it would probably mean that it was cheap, so it would probably mean it was a fake. But I can understand someone that does put value into having the originals. It's spoiling part of their experience to find out that they had a fake. Is there anything else you think we need to address tonight, Dave?
I mean, there's loads more to talk about. Value, obviously, like deeper in depth into intrinsic value, different sort of things that make it valuable, like, what is it good? But we've covered a pretty fair amount.
Yeah, I think we've covered the basics in a very basic way as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
I know each point we could have spent a bit more time on, but I don't think that we necessarily needed to. Hopefully, what we've said about value tonight has been valuable enough to those out there that it's piqued their interest. Now, if you do have questions about value, please write comments in response to this video, and we will happily do future streams on value. It's one of those topics that I've changed my mind on quite heavily. I used to be of the opinion that something is only valuable if you value it yourself. And when I've spent more time looking into the intricacies of it, I've gone, oh. And any topic that can make me do that, I mean, ethics is probably my favorite one. But any topic that can make me do that and really change my mind on when I'm looking, I find interesting. So if any of you out there find this topic interesting, I really hope that you can ask us the questions and we'll cover it off in more detail. And if you want a more roundtable discussion, Dave and I are always available to get on Discord or on Google Meet or and we'll have a chat with you. It doesn't have to be a live stream, although if you want it to be, it can be as well. But any of the topics that we have, we're definitely up for. Dave, do you have anything to say before we end tonight?
No, just that I probably won't be about at the weekend either, because I'm getting my graduation ceremony on Saturday.
Oh, it's finally happening.
Yeah.
Do we get a live stream of it, Dave?
I'm not sure if there's a live stream, but there is a recorded version after.
And where's Emma in all of this?
Well, at the moment she's in the bedroom.
At the weekend? Can she not live stream it for us?
Not with the amount of data she has. No.
But yeah, awesome. That's absolutely fantastic. Okay, so I am at my brother's bachelor party this weekend. I've actually got the day off work tomorrow, which is why I'm a bit more drunk tonight than I would. And that's why I also haven't booked in Tuesday, just in case I have one of those hangovers that goes on and on and on and skip Tuesday. But next Thursday we have Rev N Fidel back with us to discuss indoctrination and the misconceptions around indoctrination. Because many of us atheists say that people are only theists because they've been indoctrinated. But do you know what? When I was a theist, I was never indoctrinated. So, from a purely subjective stance, that claim is false. And we're going to investigate what actually indoctrination is and who has been indoctrinated in a bit more detail. That's next Thursday. Next Tuesday, though, is still pending. But I have to say thank you everybody for tonight, especially those of you who have joined us in the chat and those that joined us for the mix. I'd also like to suggest to everyone tonight that if you haven't checked it yet, right, check out the new video from Luke on Monday. He's done his own stream about borderline personality disorder. It's definitely worth checking out. Support his new fortnightly Monday stream.